All right, this morning we left off. I think we got a few places beyond where I'm at right here, but I want to kind of pick this up and lead to the next thing that we're doing. In case you're wondering, look this morning, we're over 70% through the series that we're doing on this. So if you're wondering, is there an end in sight? There is going to be an end in sight to this, but we got a few more weeks of material left, and some other things I want to share with you as we go through some of these things here. I think we were talking last time about the ocean salinity and the amount of the percentage of salt that you have in the ocean, and we're hitting this in the amount of mud in the oceans of the day. But we said the oceans get saltier every year. 450 million tons of sodium, scientists estimate, go into the oceans every year. You do have some sodium that leaves through various processes. They say about 120 million tons of that will leave the oceans in a year. But that's the net gain of 330 million tons of sodium that's being added to the oceans every single year. And yet the oceans are less than 4% salinity. For us, that's not a problem. If the Earth is 6,000 years old, as we think it is, if there was a flood 4,400 years ago, as we believe that it was, that's not a problem for us. For people that say it's 4.6 billion years old, that's a problem. It's really a lot saltier than it is. Really.
Where did those 450 million tons of sodium come from?
That's a good question.
That was my question.
Some of that is over my head. I'm going to show you a diagram here in just a minute, but some of it's through the rivers flowing. The salt comes from rich places. They say that some actually can come from through the ocean floor itself is one of the things. But so there's various things, and I'm not an expert on where all that is coming from, but there's a few of those things. And I said I got a diagram I'll share with you here in just a minute. So as we say, I've seen various numbers on this. Again, if you exclude the idea of a flood, now the idea of a flood would have put a whole bunch of sodium in that year, as y'all know. But if you excluded that, you get anywhere from 32 million to 62 million years. Not the 3 billion years, or whatever they say for the oceans, you would not see that. So I don't know if this diagram helps any. Here's where they're saying the sources come. So some is through erosion, as we say, through the rivers and other erosion that comes there from the shoreline and so forth. You have some seepage, they say, this way, seafloor exchange, so that is over my head. So some both ways that you have here. The red indicates salt that's leaving the oceans through various means, again, either being seeped into the seafloor or whatever. But you see how much is being added total in this thing. So this guy says that there should be 70 times more salt in the ocean than it is today if the Earth is billions of years old. If it's thousands, it's not even a big deal. But if it's billions, that's a problem for evolutionists. Ocean mud. Again, same thing. So you got salt that is coming in the ocean, but you also have mud that is coming in the ocean through rivers and streams and so forth. Why is the ocean not full of mud? The seafloor has some mud at the bottom of it. 20 billion tons, 40 trillion pounds of mud enter the oceans each year. Rivers are constantly depositing more dirt and sediment and so forth. They estimate that 27.5 billion tons of sediment are washed off mountains every year. Not all of that, you say that number is more than this, not all that reaches the oceans, but that's how much is being coming off each year. Some estimate that at the current rate of erosion, the continents would erode flat in 14 million years. Why are there still mountains if you have this erosion going on? That's another issue too. Some say there's things going on that's causing them to rise and this sort of thing. Oil companies have drilled into 60-foot trees that are 14,000 feet below the surface of the water. Surveys indicate that the average depth of all the sediment on the ocean floor is less than 400 meters or 1,312 feet. Some large areas of the ocean floor have hardly any mud at all. So you got some areas that are kind of muddy on the bottom, some that aren't. Again, not a problem for us. Again, if the Earth is billions of years old, that's an issue for the evolutionists. The flood of Noah's day, of course, would have sped up the process. There's only enough sediment to indicate a few thousand years of dirt down there. At the very most, without a global flood, they estimate it's about 12 million years worth of mud at the bottom of the oceans. Again, not billions. And anytime we give you these numbers, we're saying these are maximum ages. We're not telling you, I'm not telling the Earth is 12 million years old. That's the maximum it could be at the current rates of erosion, these sorts of things. That's pretty cool. I didn't do that. There's very little sediment, as we say. So here's 20 billion tons of mud that's being added as you come into the oceans each year. You have some tectonic plate movement, they say, where you lose a little bit of mud through various processes. It says after 3 billion years, we'd expect to see 250 times more sediment than we see today. Where does sediment go? Again, not an issue for us. That is an issue for evolutionists. Why is there not more mud down there? I found this one. I thought this was interesting. When we talk about the oceans, why are there oceans? Again, for us, they're created by God. Evolutionists can't even explain why there's an ocean there. So secular science does not know where the oceans came from. The origin of the water in the oceans is unclear. If it wasn't so sad, it's almost comical. You see this quotes from scientists over and over. We can't even explain where the oceans came from. Where did the stars come from? We marvel at the stars as we should. They have no explanation where the stars came from. The galaxies, all these sorts of things. They can't even tell you where the oceans came from. Sad. Ice rings. I think we hit on this a little bit a while back, but I want to share some this week. It is alleged that every ice ring indicates a year that has passed. So that's their scenario, that these are annual rings. And so that's what they'll try to say. That each of those ice rings you see, that is another year. They'll try to measure time along that line. Recent evidence has shown the fallacy of that argument. And I think that Bell calls, we were talking about this the other day, maybe. An American plane was abandoned in Greenland in 1942 during World War II. We had a history note here. We had obtained some naval and air bases from Great Britain and other places in exchange for equipment. We would sell them and get involved in the war and this sort of thing. So we got some bases there in Greenland and various places. So we were using some airstrips there during World War II. But during this time, I put a plane, but apparently several planes we wound up abandoning for various reasons. Either they didn't work anymore, whatever, but some were left there. Later, an effort was made to find a plane that was abandoned in 1942 in Greenland, and they found it in 1988. There was a guy, I think, from Kentucky that said, was reading about this, I want to find it, and he did. So it took him 46 years later. So you say, according to their scenario of these ice rings, you would expect, okay, there's 46 ice rings that the plane is under. That was not the case. So in 1988, they found this thing. In 46 years, the plane was buried under 263 feet of snow. In just 46 years, 263 feet of snow that this plane was under, an accumulation, if you do the math, that's 5.7 feet per year. Like an average of almost 6 feet per year is being put on top of this plane year by year. There were not 46 ice rings, but rather hundreds of ice rings. And I tried to find if anybody, I don't think anybody counted it, how many it was. I tried to find that information. I couldn't. But there's hundreds of ice rings.
When you say ice rings, are you talking about layers? Or?
So like layers, yes. So layers of ice, snow, this sort of thing, yes. So ice rings are not annual rings and they do not even represent summer and winter. It represents cold or warm stretch or one storm after another. You have a big snowstorm. You will have an accumulation of ice. You will have a layer of ice. You have another one. And so it indicates how many storms there have been or whatever you want to say about that. But this is not an annual thing. Now, and one speaker I was listening to said this. He said one man in Alaska got 15 layers of snow in his car in 8 hours. So showing that layers don't have to be yearly. Here's in a matter of hours, you got multiple layers that he had on his automobile. At one location, scientists have found a 10,000-foot ice core that had 135,000 rings in it. And so again, their scenario is this indicates 135,000 years of time. Since these rings are not annual rings, though, as is obvious from examples like this. I always want to talk about science. All right, here's science. What is science? You observe things, you study things, you count things. So that's true science. Since these rings are not annual rings, it does not represent 135,000 years of time. if you took a 10,000 foot ice core and divided, if you use this example, and I don't know that you could use that as being the case everywhere. I'm sure that would vary with the amount of snow and so forth. But if you took 10,000 feet and divided it by 5.7, that would equal 1,754 years. Now they'll argue and say, well, deeper ice will get compressed. Okay, I'll concede that point. Deeper ice is pressed into finer layers, but even so, it's reasonable to think that it took less than 4,400 years to accumulate the ice amounts such as this at or near the poles. So again, that's something they'll use as proof of these hundreds of thousands of years. You see from the science, that's not the case. This is, I found this diagram here. This is this particular crash site. Here's some of the stuff that's said about it. It's called the Lost Squadron. And some of y'all may know more about this. Brother Mike may know more about this than I do on that. It says 2 gigantic B-17 flying fortress bombers and 6 P-38 fighter planes were abandoned there. Here's, again, some of the planes they found 250 feet below the ice there in 1988. And this is interesting, 3 miles away from the crash site. That's how far it had moved in the ice layers and all that. Y'all have any comments? If you have questions, I probably can't answer them. If you got any comments, you can share on it.
I remember when we were in Alaska, they told us it took 100 inches of snow to make an inch of glacier. So I don't know if that relates to any of this or not, but 100 inches of snow is quite a bit of snow.
Yes, it is. Yes,
It winds up compacting in my head.
Right, right.
Yeah, the P-38s they found up there, they actually tunneled down to them and disassembled them, and then brought them back up
Wow.
the beach. They, in fact, one of them's flying right now.
Is that right?
Yeah, they call it like the Glacier Lady or something like
Wow.
that's what they need. But they actually flying it. Then there was a B-29 up there. They dug out of the ice and changing the fuel lines on it, caught it on fire as they were getting ready to take off to fly it out of there. So
Oh, goodness.
yeah, so it burned. So
You know, if we had global warming, you would think all that would have been melted away. But maybe we've been exposed from 6 pounds, something, so we're still rising or something. But since 1942, you had 250 feet of accumulation on top of it.
The global warming thing's only happening nowadays.
yeah.
Yeah.
And you think global warming just started the week before last.
It's fine.
Well, it's climate change.
12 years or
Well,
10 now.
Yeah, what was the first year they had Earth Day? Life magazine had a thing on the ice age is near. You know, that's what they were saying. It's going to be the next ice age. So
Okay, I think in the 70s they were talking about it's going to be an ice age. That was the big deal then, you know, we're about an ice age.
That's what I've heard.
yeah, so
All right, nothing related to time, and that's kind of where we're headed with this discussion is the time element in different ways that they use to date things, some of the process they use to do that. Stalagmites and stalactites. And I remember when I was in elementary school, seeing that in a textbook, they talk about that and to get proof of hundreds of thousands of years. This takes years and years and years for these things to form. A stalagmite is a type of rock formation that rises from the floor of a cave due to the accumulation of material deposited on the floor from ceiling drippings. The corresponding formation hanging down from the ceiling of a cave is a stalactite. Mnemonics have developed for which word refers to which type of formation, and here's one I found that makes it easy to remember which is which. A stalactite has a C in it, so think about a C for ceiling. Stalagmite has a G in it, and think about for the ground.
In other ways, when the mites go up, the tights come down.
I like that. I've heard that. Very good. Very good. These do not take long periods of time to form, and it is dishonest to say that it does, but that's what they'll try to say. This is hundreds of thousands of years to form these formations. And give you a few examples that I found. The Lincoln Memorial was built and dedicated in 1922, 101 years ago. They have found 50-inch stalactites that have been growing under that since the start. So in 100 years, you got a 50-inch stalactite growing at the Lincoln Memorial. A tunnel dug in Australia in 1857 formed large stalactites from the ceiling less than 140 years. So again, it didn't take tens of thousands of years. In 140 years, you have long stalactites that form. Another in Australia, a mine in Australia that was closed for 55 years was found to have stalactites several inches in length when it was reopened in 1987. A building opened, heard a speaker in Pensacola talking about this. A building opened in Pensacola in 1993. That's not ages ago. That seems like just yesterday to me. Developed a 13-inch stalactite growing under the building in just 7 years. A pipe placed in the spring of Wyoming in 1903 used stalagmite over 20 feet tall in 100 years. It doesn't take thousands and thousands of years for these to form. Scientific claims that estimate these type of growths taking 1,000, this is what the internet would say, 1,000 years to grow 2.5 inches for 1,000 years, about 1/10 of a millimeter per year. They're flat out wrong. And there's so much evidence to show that that's just not right. That's what they'll say. They'll say it over and over again, even though there's so much evidence to show otherwise. This is science. You can study these. I don't know what you would call the other. It's being dishonest in my view. So here's some pictures of stalactites and various, and again, amazing formations. I've seen some of those in caves. I know y'all have too. But it does not take thousands and thousands of years to form.
And it's also not a consistent drip. It depends on how much rain you've had. It's a lot of different aspects.
Exactly.
You go in there sometimes and we just dripping steady, and next time you go in there, maybe just a drip every minute or two.
Yes, sir. It's a great point. Great point. So this is, again, one diagram I found. Stalactites grew 1 inch per year for 10 years in this particular location. This is Sequoia Caverns, south of Chattanooga. I've never been in this particular, any of y'all have been to that particular one?
No, my wife took me in some caves. I don't care about caves, and she loves it.
I think maybe she was trying to lose you, or
Another fossil that's used sometimes to indicate age and these dating things is a trilobite. I heard a very interesting presentation. A guy from Apologetics Press, probably 20 years ago, was talking about a trilobite. I had never thought much about a trilobite, but it was a really interesting presentation. In 1968, William J. Meister found a trilobite in the state of Utah that was inside a human footprint with a sample. It kind of destroys their scenario of these things being, they consider to be an index fossil at the bottom. What's a trilobite doing with a human footprint in the same layer?
What is a trilobite?
A trilobite, I don't even know how to describe it. I don't know if I got a picture of this thing or not, but it's like some type of not like a jellyfish necessarily, but that type of a sea animal with a invertebrate, I guess you would say.
It's a fossilized.
It's a fossilized type of animal. A trilobite is called an index fossil because it is supposedly lived in the Paleozoic era of the Cambrian period, some 250 million years ago. It's supposed to be one of the earliest fossils in their scenario. The fact it was found in a human sandal print cannot be explained. Now, there was another thing that at this presentation that I heard talked about, and I've seen a few things online about this, and a lot of this over my head, but the eyes of a trilobite, the mechanisms that it had to see and so forth. Scientists have discovered that this ancient creature had the most sophisticated eye lens of any animal that has ever lived. And I think Bert Thompson talked about that how the eyes of a trilobite were like the most sophisticated. That's not what you expect with evolution, though, is it? Would you think that would be one of the last things? If we're supposedly evolving and getting better and better and better, you think there's maybe something on the latter end. There's something very, very early that has a very sophisticated eye system, way to see. And doesn't that contradict evolution? How did it get that complex that early? For us, it's not a problem. God created it with those sorts of things. So again, a problem for evolution is to explain something like that. So again, the eye system of a trilobite defies evolution. All right, dating techniques. So again, talk about some, as I mentioned, I want to reiterate that when it comes to the dating how old the Earth is, it's really the layers that you have with the mud and rocks and so forth. So they, as we said, they date the rock layers by the fossils in it, date the fossils by the rock layer that's in it. Circular reasoning, very illogical way to come about that. But there are some other methods that you probably have heard of. You've heard of the uranium lead things, the potassium argon things. I'll share just a couple of things with you about that. Here's a quote from Derek Ager. Apart from very modern examples, which are really archaeology, I can think of no cases of radioactive decay being used in egg fossils. So you may hear people say that they date the fossils because of these radio isotope methods that they have. That's not the case. So here's a scientist that says that's not how they date the fossils. So people tell you that that's not accurate. And these dating methods are not accurate, as you'll see. A guy named J.E. O'Rourke said, radiometric dating would not have been feasible if the geologic column had not been erected first. He says, without the geologic column, the geologic table, none of these would be used to date the fossils to the dates that they get them. So again, it's the geologic column that they use to date the planet, not these dating techniques that we'll share with you. Dating methods need a process that changes with time. However, you must assume things about the stars. You must also assume the rates change uniformly. So that's one of the things that they don't know. They assume that they know. They're assuming that everything was wound up when it decayed. What was the starting rates of these elements at the very start? God created a fully mature world. You don't know how much lead was in these things to start with. Or you don't know how much argon was in these things to start with. You don't know that. So they assume that. And the other thing they always assume is that these rates were always uniform. That's not always the case. Like Brother Lord was talking about the drip of these things. You don't know what the rates were, but they assume that in their methods. I'll share with you a couple of things here. A forest in Australia is covered by 69 feet of soil layers. Using radiometric dating in this forest gives you a date of 45 million years. Using carbon-14 dating gives you a date of about 45,000 years. Big discrepancy. And so a lot of these dating methods are highly different and give you some really bizarre dates on these things. Potassium-argon techniques are popular in scientific dating. However, argon has been shown to be already in the mantle, making things look much older than they are. So scientists are trying to say, what does that mean? A lot of this over my head too. But they're saying they're taking potassium and it's supposed to break down to argon after a certain period of time. Yes, do that. What they're saying is that in the mantle, they already find a lot of argon, supposedly that in rock that's supposed to be new, there's a lot of argon in it, which again destroys these dating methods that they try to use. We're going to get to carbon dating more in just a minute. Carbon dating has nothing to do with millions of years. Matter of fact, they say the half-life of carbon-14, I think, is 5,730 years or something like that. The fact that there's carbon-14 in things that are supposed to be millions of years old destroys them. Carbon-14 won't last that long. So the fact that there's carbon-14 even in things like diamonds shows that it's not as old as what they're trying to say that it is. So here's the potassium-argon deal. Diamonds dated by the potassium-argon method are thought to be 1 to 2 billion years of age. Diamonds are said to be the hardest substance on Earth known to man. They may be the head of some men in our society that are pretty hard. That means that they cannot be contaminated. So that's one thing to argue. Okay, you say, well, why is there carbon-14 in this particular sample? So we got contaminated. It was added later. That's not the case with diamonds. Diamonds have young carbon-14 in them, which shows that they can't even be millions of years old, and they say it's 1 to 2 billion years old. However, since they have all been found to have carbon-14 in them, their max age, not saying this age, but the max age of these diamonds could be is 58,000 years old. So they say it's 1 to 2 billion years old by their techniques. There's another method you can say the fact they have carbon-14 in it can't be more than 58,000 years old. And one speaker said diamonds are a creationist's best friend. The fact that they do have carbon-14 in them. Potassium 40 is said to have a half-life of 1.3 billion years. This is based on the decay of an element. Potassium decays to argon, as we mentioned. 80% of the potassium in a small sample of an iron meteorite can be removed by distilled water in 4.5 hours. What they're saying is this is their scenario. It takes 1.3 billion years for this to lose half of the potassium in a sample. That's not the case. It's not the case. It can happen very, very quickly. And again, you throw the flood component in it. I mean, a worldwide flood would cause you to lose a lot of potassium very, very quickly. So again, it would skew this thing. So again, how can we trust these dates using this method? Here's a professor that stated In conventional interpretation of potassium argon age data, it is common to discard ages which are substantially too high or too low compared with the rest of the group or with other available data, such as the geologic timescale. You say, what is he saying? Fancy language. What he's saying is, if you test some of these samples 30 times, you'll get 30 different dates. And usually a very wide spectrum, too, in doing that. So what he's saying is, you already know how old you would like it to be, so you pick a number. Basically, that's what they do. They pick the one that fits their theory the best. They believe that when lava erupts, all right, so here's an example. So, and we shared some of this with y'all the other day, I think it was. They believe that when lava erupts, the clock starts over because of the extreme heat, which will eliminate the gas. So when you get a lava flow, say, okay, you could reset the clock to zero. It should be at zero. It should be millions and millions. It should be zero at this point. However, modern lava flows that are days old will give you very old dates using these things. Get old ages for what we know as young rock. It is brand new rock, and it gives you very, very old ages. In fact, some lava flows date older than the rock that it was already there. This proves unequivocally that these methods just flat out don't work. They're flawed and need to be discarded for use on rocks and fossils. Here's a couple of examples. A lava flow in New Zealand was dated from 275,000 to 3,500,000 years, depending on which one number you pick. The flow happened in 1949. So there's rock that's however many years old that is. What is that? 70 something, 74 years. And you get hundreds of thousands, millions of years, something that you know is not even 100 years old. Mount Etna in Sicily erupted in 122 BC. That rock layer got a date of 250,000 years of age. It erupted again in 1964. Before my time, some of y'all may remember that, I don't. But it gave a date of 7 million years. So there's a more recent eruption that gave them a older date than something happened before Christ. It doesn't work. These methods don't work. An 1801 Hawaiian eruption gave a potassium argon date from 1.4 to 22 million years old. Mount Kilauea in Hawaii erupted in 1959. It was dated at 8,500,000 years old using potassium argon dating, and yet we know that's not true. So we know the age of this rock. That's what the method gives. I throw out the method. It doesn't work. Lava from the 1980 Mount St. Helens, we talked about that a couple of times, eruption gave dates between 350,000 and 2,800,000 years of age. I remember that one. I remember watching on TV when that happened. That's 43 years ago. You get dates of hundreds of thousands or millions of years. That's all.
Well, I saw it on the thing last night. They was talking about the weather going viral. I guess it was about 2 or 3 years ago. They had a tsunami in Arizona where they had a lot of rain. And when it was done and over with, they had a mudslide, they call it.
It's a great point, Charlie. And rain can change things very quickly, can it? It can change how things look very quickly. The Sunset Crater in northern Arizona is dated at over 210,000 years, when in reality, they know in recorded history it was AD 1065. And yet it dates hundreds of thousands of years old. Modern human skeletons were found in 1972 under layers of rock that were supposed to be 212 million years old. They redated to get under 2.6 million years. Again, the fossils, the dating the fossils, gave you an older age. The rock was there, so they tried to hedge their dates that they used. Now, I think I shared this with y'all the other day. Here's some things that have been observed in human history, different events, different eruptions, this sort of thing. Here's the actual ages. See one here, 21 years, Mount Etna that we're talking Mount Etna. And you see some that's happened within the last 100 years. And you see the ages and millions of years that these methods give you. They're not accurate. They're not true. And I think it's downright dishonest to try to tell that kid that this is what the ages are when they obviously don't work. Again, this is something that's a little bit over my head too. I want to try to share this with you, and y'all welcome to jump in too. Helium experiments. Got a couple of things I'll share with you here. Give nuclear evidence for a young world. The fact that there is helium in the atmosphere and helium in the rocks in particular shows a young Earth. And one of the best people, a lot of scientists will ignore this. A lot of creationist scientists say, hey, here you go. You want proof that the age of the Earth is thousands? Here you go. 1.5 billion years of nuclear decay occurred between 4,000 and 8,000 years ago. That's what scientists say, which is interesting. That's when the flood happened, is between that time frame. So why is the helium in the wrong place? There's a lack of helium in the atmosphere. There's a total amount of helium. If you want to read that number, you can calculate that if you want. Here's the known inputs. The max age, they say, regarding the amount of helium that you see in the atmosphere is less than 10,000 years. Can't be more than 10,000 years. The amount left in rock crystals indicates the decay happened approximately 6,000 years ago. According to their studies, approximately 6,000 years ago, this decay of helium began. So what event happened 6,000 years ago? Creation. The world being created. Helium permeates out at a known rate. Helium forms in rock by radioactive decay. There's way too much helium in the rock crystals to be millions and billions of years old. But it fits very well with what the Bible says, the age of the earth to be. Okay, we're going to get back to the helium thing again in a minute. So we talk about potassium argon. Uranium lead is another very famous way that people use to try to date these things. Uranium turns or decays to lead over time. It is said to have a half-life of 4.5 billion years. That's what scientists say. So they like to use this to date these ages of the Earth. But of course, there's assumptions you have to make. You must assume that there is no change in the radioactive decay rate, which you don't know, that there's no daughter element present at the beginning, there was no lead in it at the beginning, which you don't know, and that no addition or subtraction of a parent or daughter element occurred, which you don't know. Did it have lead in it to begin with? Nuclear decay rates have been speeded up greatly in the past. The experiments have shown this. And again, here's the helium thing again. Helium is a byproduct of uranium decaying to lead. Zircon crystals release excess helium. The uranium lead clock ticked at a 1.5 billion year rate. Helium leaked out at a 6,000 year rate. It is much more credible according to experiments. The diffusion rate of helium matches the young Earth model and exactly predicts 6,000 years, as we believe. Decay rates of many of these elements have been shown to be much greater than was previously thought. Again, not accurate. The things they try to say about it, just flat out wrong. Okay, so here's what science says about the Earth's age. They said radiometric dating supposedly proves the Earth is billions of years old. Helium results from almost all radioactive decay processes. Since the decay starts from rock formations, the helium that results from this decay also starts here. With time, this helium permeates or leaks into the air. The older the rock, the less helium that should be present. Where the helium is located reveals the true age of rocks. What they're saying is, so we talk about the uranium, lead, and all that. Helium is a lot better indicator, they say, of the true age, and the true age of the helium is 6,000 years of age. Y'all have any questions or comments on any of that? John?
Well, in Proverbs 25:14, it says, for whoso boasteth himself of false gift is like clouds and wind without the rain.
That's how I feel about these scientists, Charlie, these evolution scientists. That's a great point. Here's a quote by Spike Saris. I mentioned him, y'all, on the solar system part that we did. Really enjoyed hearing him. He was a former evolutionist that, as he studied this thing, became a creationist, and then later on became a believer in Christ. But here's what he says. The radiometric dating methods that evolutionists use are based on false assumptions and do not give accurate results. Every time that these methods have been tested against known samples, and that's what science is. You look at something you know, and you can examine your data. We're not doing that with this. The dating methods have failed to produce accurate results. What it really comes down to is that the billions of years are based upon a series of assumptions. Since the assumptions are wrong, the billions of years are wrong also. And I say amen to that. The Bible is a revelation of God who knows everything. The Bible gives a history, is the foundation for our worldview. I know you feel the same way about that. Now, the carbon-14 thing. I just to be very honest with y'all, I knew very little about this until researching this a little bit myself. But carbon-14 dating is, maybe to say it's a friend of ours is going a little bit too far, but it's certainly opposed to these older dating methods. Radiocarbon dating was invented in 1949. So this is a pretty recent thing that they have developed. They're already talking about long ages long before carbon dating. So in 1949, they're already talking about the Earth being billions and billions of years old. And so they tried to find a way to incorporate this into those methods. However, carbon-14 is proof of a young Earth. Why do old fossils still have carbon in them? And I mentioned this to y'all a minute ago. All fossils give young carbon-14 ages. All of them. All of them. These fossils that are supposed to be millions of years old give young ages, or at least a lot younger than the millions of years. Carbon-14 has a half-life of only 5,730 years. That means half of the material decays in that amount of time. So remember the half-life. So what the sample is, in 5,730 years, half of the original carbon-14 should be gone. There should be no measurable C14 after 40,000 to 50,000 years. And one person I saw said that gives you a max age of 70,000 years. Not saying that it is 70,000 years old, but it gives a max age of that. If there's carbon-14 in something, it can only be tens of thousands of years old, not hundreds of thousands, not millions. It shouldn't have any in it. It should all be gone. Carbon-14 is said to decay and turn into nitrogen-14 in less than 100,000 years. And you'll find some that will say, well, 250,000 years. But the point is, again, it has a limited time that it can last. Okay, some say 250,000. If the whole Earth were made of carbon-14, it would completely break down in less than a million years. In a million years, there'd be no carbon-14 left. And yet all of these samples have carbon-14 in them. Many things that are dated in millions of years have carbon-14 in it, which means it is not millions of years old. So again, I didn't know much about carbon-14 at all, but carbon-14 is, again, maybe an acquaintance of ours, maybe not a friend, but an acquaintance of ours. And again, showing that those things are not the case. Again, I told this, so I did not do that. There's carbon-14 in all of these types of things. So you see it in these fossils. These fossils have carbon-14 in it. If it's millions of years, it shouldn't, but it does. Diamonds, the hardest substance on the planet. So they'll try to say, well, carbon-14 snuck into it. No, it didn't, but it has carbon-14 in it. Coal has carbon-14 in it. Again, and they say coal is hundreds of millions of years old. It should have no C14 all in it. So limiting factors of carbon. So animals living before the flood would have had a lot less C14 than animals have today. Showing what this is saying is, those trying to say with carbon-14 that it's tens of thousands. But we're saying even that is not accurate. The decay rate would have been different earlier on. According to a guy named R.E. Taylor, he said radiocarbon is forming 28 to 37% faster than it's decaying. So it's saying actually there's more carbon-14 being formed in our world at this point than is being lost at this point. And like I said, something on the top of my head, but what they call equilibrium, where these numbers should equal out. The amount being formed and the amount decaying should be the same. It's estimated that it takes 30,000 years to reach equilibrium, which means the Earth is less than 30,000 years of age. So that's what that would say. The fact that it had equaled out, it should have equaled out at a certain time. It hadn't. So the Earth can only be, and I'm not saying the Earth is 30,000 years old, but the max age using C14 will be 30,000 years of age. Modern equipment can measure 1,000th of 1%. You say, how accurate are these amount of C14 you can measure? Modern equipment can measure 1,000th of 1% of modern levels, or roughly 100,000 years. Every molecule of organic origin contains 0.1 to 0.5% of the modern levels. So again, carbon-14 is a friend of ours. But even using the C14, let me give you some examples here showing that even this is not an accurate way to measure things. Here's two scientists that I don't think are creationists. They admitted if a C14 date supports our theories, we put it in the main text. I appreciate the honesty here. So they say if they date something with C14 and it agrees with something they have, they'll mention it. If it does not entirely contradict them, our theories, we put it in a footnote. If it is completely out of date, we just drop it. What they're saying is, if a C14 date contradicts something that we believe, then we just don't report it. We don't promote it. Don't put it out there. I appreciate their honesty in talking about their dishonesty in this thing. This means that they pick and choose what number they want. Another scientist stated that fully half the dates are rejected. So like that, they'll try to tout C14, how accurate it is, and others will do that too. But they admit that at least half the dates will just throw out. That they know the dates that they're getting are not accurate. James P. Dawson was involved in dating the moon rocks brought back in 1969. They ranged anywhere from 10,000 years to several billion years on the same rocks. What do you think that shows? That they say that these moon rocks are 4.6 billion years old. They got some dates of 10,000 years on those. Give a couple other examples. 2 mammoths found side by side in ice and this sort of thing were dated at, one was dated at 22,000 years. The other one that died right beside him was dated at 16,000 years. Pretty big discrepancy right there. Is this accurate? It should be the same thing. It's not. In 1979, another mammoth was dated at 29,500, while another part of the same mammoth was dated at 44,000 years. Neat trick. Yeah, part of your body is older than the rest of you. Using radiocarbon dating in 1949, the lower leg of a mammoth dated at 15,380 years of age, while the skin dated 21,300 years. The point is, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Dinosaur bones have been dated at less than 30,000 years of age using carbon-14 dates. We're going to discuss that more in another week or so about the dinosaurs. Say, what's the significance there? If you were to take a dinosaur bone to somebody that was carbon-14, an evolutionary scientist, and say, I want you to use carbon-14 to date this dinosaur bone, they will not. They will refuse to do that. So why? They know that it won't give you those millions of years. So they say, no. People have taken, creationist scientists have taken dinosaur bones, didn't tell them it was a dinosaur bone, had it dated, and it would be thousands of years and not millions of years. So the fact that these dinosaur bones have carbon-14 in them at all disproves their scenario. This is one I was talking about. Miller of Ohio had 4 dinosaur bones. He took it to a laboratory, didn't tell him it was a dinosaur bone, and dated it 20,000 years. Now, I'm not saying I agree with the 20,000 year date, but it's a much less than the millions of years that they will try.
Well, then you had that one scientist that was only back in 2013 or 14 over in California that found a dinosaur bone with soft tissue still on it. And then he was going to publish a paper saying how all the stuff they've been thinking was wrong, and they fired him before he could publish anything and discredited him. So,
it's sad. It really is. And I've heard of a number of stories like that of scientists getting fired for just trying to tell the truth. And they can't allow that to get out in the public space. And so it's sad to me, I had to study and search for the material I'm sharing with you. It's just sad to me that they'll cover this stuff up and they won't share this with other people. Some other examples of incorrect dating methods. A living mollusk, this was a living animal, an animal that was alive, was dated to be 2,300 years of age using these methods. I don't think it was 2,300 years old. That'd be neat to see how it got that old. Again, it doesn't work. A freshly killed seal was carbon dated having died 1,300 years ago. And just died that day or that week. Shells from living snails were carbon dated as being 27,000 years old. It was alive and dated to be tens of thousands of years old. Living penguins were dated as being 8,000 years old. One scientist lied for 30 years, and that's the sad thing, is they lied, and we'll talk about this more later on. They lied to kids in the early part of the 20th century that they had lies, and they still have lies in the textbook, but knowingly lying about some of the stuff they found. One scientist lied for 30 years about a Neanderthal skeleton being dated at 21,300 years. He knew that was not the case, but that's what he said. When retested at Oxford, the age was found to be 3,300 years. Less than the time for the flood. The same professor dated a skull at 27,400 years. It was later found that it belonged to an elderly man who died in 1750, less than 300 years ago. But yet they're dishonest about these things, and it's really just a shame that is the case. All right. We're going to continue this next time. I'm going to get out of this, moving some other things with y'all. But again, I thank you for your good attention and for your good comments.